You weren't supposed to hear that radio again. That's what they told her when she signed her discharge papers, when she packed away the uniform she'd worn since she was 19. It's over now, they'd said. Go live your life, Sergeant. And she tried. Out in Maple Hollow, where the air smelled like hay and rain, and the loudest thing most mornings was the hens fussing over scattered grain. But fate doesn't ask permission to call you back. Before we begin, if you believe that duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off, make sure to like and subscribe, because what happened on that farmyard proves that some echoes of service never fade. It was the kind of morning that could have passed for peace. The kind where the light spills soft over the fields, and everything looks like it remembers how to breathe. Claire Dawson, 28 years old, sleeves rolled, mud on her boots, stood by the chicken coop with a tin pail in one hand and feed dust clinging to her palms. She moved quietly, always quietly, as if the whole world was fragile and she didn't want to wake it. The hens clucked and fussed around her ankles, feathers brushing against her jeans. She smiled faintly, though no one ever saw it long enough to call it a smile. The others on the farm said she was good help, dependable, quiet, polite enough. They didn't know much beyond that. She'd shown up 2 years earlier with a pickup full of boxes, a duffel she never opened in public, and a radio older than she was. It sat on a shelf in the barn, patched with tape and wire, forever tuned to static. That thing still work? Old Mr. Lewis had asked once, wiping sweat from his neck with a rack. She'd just shrugged, sometimes. After that, it became a running joke. When the cows got loose, someone would yell, "Hey, Sergeant, radio command for backup," and the crew would laugh. Claire laughed too, the kind of laugh that only reaches the surface but never sinks in. Her days followed a rhythm, one she'd built carefully. Feed the hens, mend the fence, check the soil. Work until her hands forgot what they used to hold. Rifles, mats, lifelines. The locals never asked what she did before this, and she never volunteered. Maybe it was her eyes, steady but distant, that warned them off. Maybe it was the way she scanned the tree line every time the dogs barked, the way her shoulders tightened when the sky rumbled like distant artillery. Maple Hollow was a small place, the kind of town that felt preserved in amber. Farmers knew each other by the sound of their trucks, and gossip traveled faster than weather. They all had a story about Claire, how she'd come back from over there after something went wrong, how she couldn't sleep through fireworks, how she still wrote letters to names no one recognized. Most of it wasn't true. Some of it was. But truth didn't matter much here. People liked their stories tidy, and Claire Dawson didn't fit in tidy boxes. Still, she found a kind of stillness in the work. The rhythm of it. The hens didn't care who she used to be. They didn't ask what medals were buried in her bottom drawer, or why she flinched when the wind caught a loose sheet of tin. They just wanted grain, water, and consistency. 3 things Claire had learned to provide without fail. By mid-morning, the sun hummed low and heavy, and the smell of soil thickened in the air. Claire tipped the last of the feed into the trough, brushing her hands off on her jeans. The farm hands were already gathering by the truck, joking about who'd drive into town for supplies. Jessie, the youngest, no more than 19, pointed toward the barn and grinned. "You keeping that old army radio on again? You waiting for aliens or something?" She looked up, half-smile tugging at her lip. "Just like the noise," she said. "Noise," he laughed. "That's all it ever is. Static and ghosts." "Maybe that's enough," she replied, turning back toward the coop. Inside the barn, dust motes drifted through beams of light. The radio crackled faintly on the shelf, a pulse of static that felt almost alive. Claire leaned against the post, listening the way some people listen to rain. Beneath the static, she sometimes swore she could still hear the coded patterns, faint bursts, pauses, rhythms only soldiers learned to notice. But she told herself it was nothing. Ghost habits, echoes. When she closed her eyes, the farm faded, replaced by the memory of a desert sky streaked with flares. Voices over comms, clipped and calm. Her voice among them, issuing orders, counting seconds. She opened her eyes again, breathing slow. Not here. Not now. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the thermos, black and bitter, and stood by the doorway watching the horizon. A hawk wheeled overhead, and for a fleeting moment, she thought of freedom, then of duty, the twin weights that never quite balanced. At lunchtime, the crew sat by the well, eating sandwiches and swapping stories. Claire stayed near the barn, half listening. The laughter was easy, unburdened. She envied it. Mr. Lewis shouted over. "Dawson, you ever gonna teach us that parade march of yours?" "I'm retired," she called back. "From what?" "Chicken wrangling." The others laughed, and Claire smiled politely. "Retired. The word never sat right. You retire from jobs, not from purpose." When the laughter faded, she found herself alone again with the hum of cicadas and the faint, restless whisper of the radio. She ran her thumb across the chipped dials, tracing the notches like prayer beads. She remembered the weight of her last command, the faces of her team as they boarded the final transport home. Some had made it back in body, some only in memory. Claire leaned against the barn door, looking out at the open field, gold under the noon sun. For the first time that day, she let herself breathe deep, slow. Maybe, she thought, this is what peace feels like. Uneventful, ordinary, beautiful in its stillness. Then, faintly, almost beneath hearing, the radio clicked. A fragment of static cut clean through the air, sharper than before. She froze, her pulse tightening. The others kept talking, unaware. She waited. Nothing. Just static again, rolling back into silence. She exhaled slowly and laughed at herself under her breath. "Jumping at ghosts again, Dawson," she murmured. She turned back to the coop, shaking off the chill that had crept up her spine. The hens were fussing over spilled grain, pecking at her boots as if urging her back to work. And she did, because that's what you do when the world starts whispering. You keep moving, keep tending, keep pretending it's all behind you. But somewhere deep down, she knew peace that fragile never lasts. Out in the fields, thunder rumbled softly in the distance, a storm rolling in faster than expected. Jessie called out something about getting the tools in before the rain, and Claire nodded absently, already glancing toward the barn. The radio light flickered once, faint but unmistakable, like an eye opening after a long sleep. For now, she told herself it was nothing. A glitch. Old wires. Just the hum of an old life refusing to die quietly. But before the day was over, that static would speak again, and when it did, the quiet girl who everyone thought had left her battles behind would remind them all that some soldiers never stop answering the call. The storm came faster than anyone expected. 1 minute the sky was a dull gray blanket. The next it was split by wind that bent the trees and carried the smell of rain like metal on the tongue. The farmhands scattered, grabbing tools and running for the barn. Claire was already there, securing the door latches, her movements quick and sure. Thunder rolled across the valley, low and mean. Inside, the hens squawked and flapped, wings beating like hearts out of rhythm. Then, through the noise, a sound sharper than thunder cut the air, the radio. It started as static, same as always, but this time there was structure beneath it. A pause, a burst, then a voice, calm, clipped, official. "Echo team, this is command. Sergeant Dawson, situation escalated. Confirm presence." The words hung in the air, impossible and yet absolute. Every head turned toward her. Jessie froze halfway through laughing, the sound dying in his throat. Mr. Lewis blinked, certain he'd misheard. Claire didn't move for a heartbeat, her hand still on the latch. Then the stillness broke. She turned slowly toward the radio, her eyes sharp, alive in a way none of them had ever seen. "Dawson here," she said, voice steady, controlled. "Confirm presence. What's the update?" No hesitation, no confusion, just command. The room fell silent, but for the hiss of rain and the crackle of the line. Static flared again, then the same voice returned, distorted but clear enough to make the air feel heavier. "Unauthorized surveillance in Sector 4. Local grid compromised. You are the nearest responder. Engage discretion protocol. Repeat, discretion protocol." The transmission cut. Jessie stared at her. "What the hell does that mean?" he whispered. Claire didn't answer. She was already moving. She crossed to the back of the barn, to the duffel bag she'd kept tucked beneath the feed sacks since the day she arrived. The same one no one had ever seen her open. She unzipped it without a word. Inside, black fatigues, compact gear, a sealed comm headset, a sidearm case she didn't even glance at, and an old embroidered patch. Joint Task 12, Special Recon. The kind of patch that didn't exist outside of classified briefings. "Claire," Mr. Lewis said slowly, his voice trembling. "What is this?" She looked up, eyes calm. "Something I hoped I'd never have to use again." Jessie stepped back. "Are you saying this is real?" "You're..." Not retired, she cut in gently. Just waiting. Rain hammered against the tin roof now, a full storm unleashed. She slung the duffel across her shoulder and adjusted the radio frequency with practiced hands. Every motion was deliberate, no wasted effort. The easy farm hand they knew was gone. In her place stood someone trained to move when others froze. She opened the barn door. Wind roared in, rain slicing sideways. Sector 4's East Ridge, she said over her shoulder. No one comes after me. If anyone asks, you didn't see me. Jessie took a step forward. But what's happening out there? Claire paused in the doorway. The storm light caught her profile. Calm, unflinching. Something that doesn't belong this close to home, she said. Then she stepped out into the rain and was gone, swallowed by wind and darkness. For a long moment, no one spoke. The radio on the shelf hissed softly, empty now but still alive, waiting. Jessie stared at it, half afraid it would speak again. Mr. Lewis sat down heavily on a crate, rubbing his hands together. "Sergeant," he muttered under his breath. She wasn't kidding. Outside, the storm raged on. Flashes of lightning carved the fields into momentary daylight, and if you looked closely enough toward the ridge, you might have seen a lone figure moving through the rain, steady, deliberate, and unafraid. Claire Dawson, the quiet farmhand, was gone. In her place, Sergeant Dawson had returned, answering a call she'd never really stopped hearing. By the time the storm passed, Maple Hollow was draped in silence, the kind that feels too heavy to be peace. Rainwater pooled in the tractor ruts, the smell of wet earth clinging to everything. The farmhands emerged slowly from the barn, blinking against the pale light of early evening. The air felt different, thinner somehow, as if the storm had taken more than clouds with it. Out by the fence line, the windmill creaked back to life, turning in lazy half-circles. And then they saw her. Claire was walking up the dirt road, soaked through, boots caked in mud. She carried no pack now, just the small radio, silent in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, a calm born not from peace, but from knowing exactly what she'd done. The others rushed toward her, questions spilling out faster than sense. "Where did you go? What happened?" were those. But she only said, "It's handled." Mr. Lewis stepped closer, frowning. "Handled how?" Claire set the radio down on the porch rail. There was an intruder near the relay out east. Not local. Someone watching things they shouldn't. They won't be back. She said it simply, like talking about a fence post fixed or a field sown. But the way she said it, steady, final, told them it was no small thing. Jessie swallowed, still wide-eyed. That message earlier. Who was that? The military? Something like that, Claire said quietly. Old networks. Old debts. He hesitated. You're still part of them, aren't you? Claire looked out toward the horizon where the storm had broken open the clouds. A thin ray of sunlight spilled through. Some doors don't close, she said softly. You just stop knocking. No one knew what to say after that. The group stood in silence, the weight of it settling over them as slow realization dawned. The woman they'd teased about her static radio had just answered a call from people they couldn't even name. And while they'd hidden from the storm, she'd walked straight into it. Mr. Lewis removed his hat, eyes downcast. We owe you one, Sergeant. She gave a faint smile. You don't owe me anything. I just did what I was trained to do. She picked up the radio again, turning the knob until the static faded into a quiet hum. Besides, she added, almost to herself, someone has to keep watch. That night, the farm was still. The hens were quiet, the fields washed clean. But the workers noticed something new. A small sign mounted beside the barn door. A strip of metal stamped with 5 words, the kind soldiers live by. Stay ready. Stay steady. Always. No one knew when she put it there. Maybe she'd carried it with her all along. Weeks later, the story still lingered. A few locals swore they'd seen black SUVs on the ridge that night. Others said it was nonsense, just thunder and nerves. But the farmhands knew. They'd seen the way she moved, the way she spoke, the calm that only comes from someone who's faced chaos and learned to make it quiet. Now, whenever the radio crackled in the barn, no one joked. They paused, just for a second, listening. Because everyone in Maple Hollow knew. If it ever called again, Claire Dawson would answer. The same way she always had. Without fanfare, without fear, without waiting for permission. And when they told the story later, about the quiet girl who fed chickens until the day the sky turned dark and the radio spoke her name, They always ended it the same way. She didn't go looking for a fight, they'd say, but when the world remembered who she was, she didn't hide from it either. Out on the edge of the field, where the storm first broke, a faint pulse of light still flickered some nights, like a heartbeat buried under the soil, waiting. Some said it was interference from an old signal tower. Others said it was something else entirely. But Claire never explained. She just kept working, feeding the hens, mending the fences, listening to the wind. And every now and then, when the static hummed low and familiar, she'd smile the smallest of smiles. Because peace, she knew, was never silence. It was the promise that when duty called again, she'd be ready.